From the home offices of Ash and Flo, this is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around to listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
Welcome to this new episode of Unbillable Hours. For this one, we had the great pleasure of speaking to John Tyreman. He's the Director of Marketing at Silverback Strategies, a digital marketing and advertising consultancy. He also runs the firm's podcast, by the way, which we'll recommend in the show notes, so you can go and check that out. John is an interesting fellow because he spent part of his earlier career researching professional services marketing from the outside, like looking at firms, before taking the job he currently has, where he has to do the marketing for a firm. So interesting outside in, inside out perspectives is what he brings to the table. And we ended up talking shop for about an hour. Plus we had the little issue that Ash got held up in meetings and joined us late. So we did edit this episode quite a bit, but I think we landed on the best 30 minutes to give to you, and we hope you enjoy it. Join us as we begin the conversation by exploring a list of changes that are coming to professional services marketing.
You said that there's multiple changes, so give me your list then.
Well, yeah. So marketing, there's the only constant is change in marketing. Yeah. And platform changes on how business leaders look at marketing. We were just talking about how marketing has shifted from being an expense item to being looked at as an investment in growth and a driver of revenue. So I think that's a big mindset shift. And, it's no wonder that the CMOs have the shortest tenure in the C-suite, right? Because that's how it's been looked at, kind of that old guard mentality. And so, connecting those dots and helping business leaders understand the revenue impact of marketing, I think that's just one of the first stepping stones for us to get to that point where marketing is viewed as an investment. There's a ton of change that's always going on in marketing. And one of the big changes right now is, and I know that you're ahead of the game in Europe with GDPR, but here in the States, the CCPA went into effect not even a year ago.
Yeah.
But what's happening is platforms like Google, Facebook, they're updating their privacy preferences to where users have to opt in to privacy or ad preferences. And so that's having a major impact because now Google needs to change the way that they operate. Apple just rolled out their 14.5 iOS update that's changing the way that users opt in.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned these 2 points, like the shift to seeing it as more revenue driving, and then at the same time, tighter privacy regulations. There's this huge debate about. I've seen you publish stuff around the going away of third-party cookies, and I don't know if you want to riff on that, but I see all this from a bigger picture. And it seems like it's going into a direction where maybe at the end of it, the old is new again. Like a lot of the fancy digital measurements we gotten so used to go away, but maybe that's not as big a problem if at the same time you shift to a model where you measure much, much more higher level business results, right? Sales qualified opportunities, I don't know, pipeline velocity, God forbid, marketing source revenue, these types of things. Some of that retargeting, influenced, who went where stuff, might go away and no harm done.
I like to think about it as, I don't know how familiar you are with the show Mad Men from AMC, but it seems like that's kind of where we're shifting towards, where, these data privacy regulations, it's kind of an end to the wild, wild west of digital marketing, where we have all of this information around the individual users. Well, now that that's going away and we have less personal identifiable information at our fingertips as marketers, what that does is it really puts the stress on creative, honestly, and in the content, exactly, because the users now, they realize that their information is extremely valuable. they no longer have to opt out of communications. They're in a position now where they say, you want my personal information? Give me something valuable
This
in
better be good.
return
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in the B2B world and in professional services, that's done with content. In the B2C world, that's done with, like, offers, like give me your email address in exchange for 20% off of, whatever product you're looking for. But that's how it's done. And the shift away from these third-party cookies is making, from the company's perspective, and this is especially true for professional services, the importance of first-party data. So in the many professional services firms do this already, where they harvest email addresses in exchange for content and then nurture them with their email lists. They send them webinars, that whole gambit. And, that'll work. That'll still work.
Yeah,
Um,
Phil, you're right. I see that. I see that ending very soon, to be honest. But yeah, it's still.
Why do you say that?
Because I mean, that is a bit of a personal view on things and philosophy, and I don't know if you agree, but I have always, how'd you say in English, pissed off my digital marketing teams and the firms I worked with and at, by going around and saying, look, if professional services is all about relationship and trust, I don't find it a very trust-building exercise that the moment I visit your website, you slap me in the face with a cookie consent button. Can't we do without that? Has always been my question. And that pissed people off for a while. And then with the rise of LinkedIn and me just stupidly seeing how freaking well it works. And so now that got me thinking, why even collect email addresses in the first place? If the purpose is to get a relevant message in front of someone who's interested, I can do that on LinkedIn. I don't have to clutter their inbox and inherit all the privacy concerns. Like, once you give me your personal data, the defending of them, the compliant management is all my problem. If I just get into your LinkedIn feed, it's LinkedIn's problem, right? It's like, I save all the money of upkeeping it and updating it. And blah, blah. So that's where that opinion comes from. That's what I mean when I say old is new again. Maybe we go back to this old day and age of maximizing reach and then making sure that what you do with that reach is so good that people come back for more, because your ability to spam anyone at every time with very high efficiency, regardless of how bad the content is, that's being taken away.
Well, and what also is being taken away is your ability to target precisely who you want to get your message in front of.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to make creative even more important, is the ability for you to use creative to target. And what I mean by that is, use imagery.
Yeah.
Exactly. Self-selecting what they resonate with and the images that you use and the copy that you use in your creative. And so that's why I think it's going to kind of shift towards, more higher level metrics like you talked about, reach, but then, that creative and the content is really what's going to drive conversions.
Yeah. But can I bring you back? Because I want to maybe get your expert's take on what's next for professional services marketing. One point you make, and I agree, is next immediate step is first-party data becomes more important. Like what I said, my philosophy of saying, let's don't even collect email addresses, you don't have to buy that. I see why firms will still collect the data because, yeah, it does work. I get that. So what can you see then? And there's a rise of importance in creative. So you sort of said that as well, and I agree. What else can you see happen?
Sure. Well, you alluded to it earlier with what you're doing on LinkedIn and how incredibly successful that is, generating reach and interest and awareness. And so that's why I believe that personal branding has become mainstream. And at Hinge, we called it visible experts, becoming an expert in your field. And in professional services, that's absolutely true. It's an expertise-based sale. Essentially, if you're providing a service for a business, the buyers are always going to look at you and say, have you done this with another company like me? Do you have experience in my industry? That's what they want to know, because they want to reduce their risk, right? They want to really understand that this investment is going to provide a return, and we know this because they've done it before for someone else. So I guess where I'm going with that is, as an individual, people trust individuals more than they trust corporate logos, right? So if you can demonstrate your expertise, whether that's in your individual expertise or your team's expertise, that's really how you can generate more trust on platforms like LinkedIn, they prefer individual user accounts. That's why you're seeing more reach than from the branded accounts. So that's one area that I see changing. And kind of related to that, honestly, are these new mediums. I think audio-based content like podcasts, what we're doing right now,
Yeah.
is the next wave, because there's billions of blogs, but there's relatively very few podcasts
Yes,
out there right
I
now.
saw the number recently. Someone posted it. I forgot. It's either 2 million or 20 million. Probably 20 million. But it's so if you look at that, it seemed big, but they made the same comparison you just made, saying, yeah, if that seems big, keep in mind though, like blogs is like, well, there's like 2 blogs for every person on the planet or whatever. No, it's 2 billion. You said blogs. Jesus.
Oh gosh, I believe so. I think it's like
Yeah,
$1 billion or 2 billion.
We
Yeah.
can, whatever the number is, but the point is very clear. There is still untapped potential probably in the podcast space.
It flies against a lot of the conventional marketing wisdom, where it's like, if you want to give high value content, we want to be able to collect some sort of an email for it, right? Put it behind a gate. But it's hard to do that with podcasts, and it's hard to measure the return on your investment in a podcast.
You can't even
but
see
the intangibles. Well, exactly. Other than just like social
Numbers.
feedback,
Yeah,
and folks, commenting on your LinkedIn audiograms that you put up. But yeah, so I guess it's really the way that you use the podcast, right? So, and I was thinking about this. I set out a few weeks ago to really try to understand Google Analytics 4 and everything that's going on with how Google's shifting away from their universal analytics, and they're going to replace it with this Google Analytics 4. And the blogs that I was reading, everything that I read, like, I kind of understood it and it made sense a little bit. But then I just had a conversation with one of our analytics team members here at Silverback, and just hearing him talk about it, I was like, oh, I get it, right? So I guess it depends on how people learn. Some people learn well by reading. Some people learn well visually. Some people learn by listening. And so I think a podcast is a great way to appeal to those different learning styles.
Yeah. And what I like, and I had this problem very often in with professional service firms in particular, as someone who's a real subject matter expert and has a great story to tell, will struggle in writing that up. And I think the podcast format not only easier for learners, but it makes it easier for the SMEs to contribute to the content creation. Because I have met many of them who are perfectly great at explaining it, because they give boardroom presentations and that stuff all the time. They have the hardest time in putting it on paper, even if someone else does the writing and they just have to critique the written product. It's very interesting. So podcast could be a huge shortcut, actually, for those guys.
That's been my experience, is that it's like sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get some of these subject matter experts to write a blog post, and it takes hours and hours and it's draining. But then you ask them to hop on a 20-minute podcast chat, and boom, there you go. You've got content that you can pull a transcript from, repurpose it on your blog, embed the media player here and there, pull it. It becomes a flywheel of sorts, where you can take that. The podcast is the source of it, and then you pull out blog posts, you pull out social posts, you pull out, all these different, spokes to that hub of the content. And that's where I see a lot of companies kind of that have figured that out are doing marketing really, really well today.
How can you see some of these things we've just touched upon? What does it mean for the function? Now we're talking necessarily about larger firms, but these marketing teams, what is their role? Because what you said about the visible experts, as you call it, made me think, well, maybe then the job becomes more of a coaching, facilitating, and supplying them with materials. Like the SME does the LinkedIn post and does the writing or does the podcast. Marketing comes in to provide the visuals, give them training, and then maybe amplify the distribution through some paid programs or whatever. I don't know. Have you seen anything changes like that, or is it still same old mostly? Or how do you?
I like your perspective.
How do you do it? How do you run your current shop or job? Because that is your role, right? You have to work with all these experts.
Well, yeah, and running the marketing for a digital marketing agency it's something else, right?
There
Because
are jobs,
not only I'm working with a bunch of really talented marketers with specializations in SEO and paid media and creative content analytics. So they all have very, very focused disciplines. And so it's kind of connecting the dots between all of those different disciplines and showing how they all work together. That's one of my big challenges. But then, the audience that I am targeting, they are also marketers.
Yeah.
So the bar is really, really high. So,
So,
I mean,
I'm
it
sorry.
makes it easy because,
One
please
follow-up
go
question
ahead.
though. One follow-up question. Would you say then that your role is you're almost like a bit more of the curator? Because I'm still thinking about how the marketing organization works. What you seem to be saying is, I have all the experts. I need to pick the pieces and then bring that together in a story that makes sense to a fairly sophisticated audience, which is different from no one here does anything. I have to come up with the campaigns and publish stuff. It's more of a curating what gets amplified by the company versus the individual experts.
Well, I'm glad that you said story, because that's a big point of emphasis for me, is how do we explain these complex concepts in a simple way. And one of the best ways to do that is through storytelling. And I mentioned earlier that when buyers are purchasing a professional service, one of the big things that they ask is, have you done this for a company like me, or what experience do you have in your industry? And you can do that through different case stories. You can do that through in the trenches examples of your experts kind of sharing their own experience, not necessarily prescribing recommendations, but just sharing their own personal experience. Because as humans, we are all hardwired to learn through storytelling. So the extent to which marketers can tell better stories of their experts, their experience, of their clients and their experience, that's how you're going to win in marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree that, and that's interesting, and especially it becomes a bit more difficult, right? If the experts themselves speak up more because that's what works, like the personal profile on LinkedIn, having your own voice, and then still weaving the story on top of it that holds it together. Yeah, I can see that becoming more tricky in the future. It's interesting because it will require different skill sets. The skill mix you just described here, which is do both the storytelling and have a handle on stuff like analytics or the distribution side, for example. That's a gap there, or a development need. I don't know in terms of training the people.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think at least in my experience, I like to consider myself as sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. And I let the experts be the experts in their niche, right? So they're the T-shaped marketers. So I want to take all of these different T-shaped marketers and I want to accentuate their expertise, and tell the story to our audience in a way that is digestible, but it also peppers in that expertise too and showcases that, but doesn't go too deep. It's a balancing act. So striking the right balance and understanding how much depth do you need to go into your expertise in your marketing. I think that's a really key question that a lot of professional services marketers need to answer.
Yeah. That is that for themselves and for their own careers. Yeah, certainly. I mean, maybe adding to that, I really like your point about the shift from viewing marketing as an expense, sort of a cost center, and sort of being efficient and otherwise, don't rock the boat too much, to being a revenue driver and an area to invest in and so forth. And I think that will also highlight the amount of business skill people have to bring. I mean, you've researched the market in your career, and you probably know more about this than I do, but I'm surprised. I often meet people who run fairly big budgets and have built fairly big plans, and they've never been into the CRM system of the firm. So if you talk to them about pipeline velocity, they know what it is, right? It's not that they don't know it, but it's the way the function is set up. They don't get to look at it, or that is not how the marketing function is allowed to work. It really strikes me as weird.
Well, and that's why you got to break down silos, and that to me reeks of silos between marketing and sales.
Yeah.
And that's why I think having sales experience is incredibly helpful to marketers, because you really understand what drives revenue, right? That's the conversion point of revenue is sales. So if you can understand those metrics, understand how to look at pipeline reports, look at revenue by lead source, revenue by channels, that sort of thing, and pull those reports. That's really what matters most to leadership, is really understanding what's driving revenue. So if you can prove that, then there will be more buy-in to marketing being seen as an investment rather than an expense.
Yeah. I really like that sentence. The conversion point of revenue is sales. Yeah, true. That's it. Which goes back to the point about cookies and all that stuff. Or maybe not cookies, but maybe metrics and attribution, what you can do, what not for the business. Yeah, the strategic KPI certainly is that, or is around that conversion point.
Well, and then there's also it kind of goes both ways too, right? So if you have a marketing team and you have a sales team, but the sales team doesn't understand the marketing narrative and the key marketing messages, then you're going to have misalignment. Marketing could be driving the right opportunities to the sales team, but they fizzle out because they were brought in under a certain message, but that message just wasn't continued throughout the sales process. So it's not just one-sided where marketing needs to understand sales. Salespeople need to understand the core tenets of marketing and storytelling as well.
Do you have a view on how the silo also breaks the use of content in the organization? What I mean by that is marketing creates a beautiful research report or whatever, right? And it's very cool. And then half a year later, they find out sales never really use it, or not even sales, but the account teams or the business. Like the idea was they would take this to clients and have glowing conversations and open up all kinds of opportunities. And you find out the reality was they were like, yeah, we read it, but we never really do you have any takes, any secret sauce on how to maybe fix that, or what the issue is? Or was that just my experience and everyone else is doing it perfectly fine and there's no problem whatsoever?
That is a very common challenge, Florian. So yeah, I've run into that many times where, a marketing team will create a stellar piece of content and it's a core part of the marketing narrative and the marketing message, but the sales team just either they don't know about it, or they don't understand how it can help drive their sale. And so that's where you really need to break down those silos and be in constant communication with the sales team and with marketing teams and breed alignment between those functions, because at the end of the day, they're all in it together to drive revenue.
Have you seen examples of professional services firms trying to break the silo? I mean, in SaaS world, you hear lots of talks about the chief revenue officer, right? And sort of just mashing the two teams together. And then I can't speak to how well that works. But have you seen something equivalent in services world, or is it just not a topic that's being... Because I'm asking because I haven't seen it. Those structures I've seen are still fairly classical in that sense.
Well, I mean, if you go back to the kind of the Rainmaker approach, where you have a well-known established subject matter expert who's going out there and they're delivering keynote presentations, they're speaking at conferences, they're doing webinars. In today's day and age, you've got well-known subject matter experts who have a podcast, who do regular video series. That would be, and they're the ones who are closing the business too. So you've got a seller doer who is out there demonstrating their expertise, telling stories. That's effective marketing, but they're also the ones that are closing the business. Now, is that a scalable model? No, that's not really a scalable model, but it is a good example of how marketing and sales can converge.
Yeah.
So that would be just one example that I point to.
You're right. I never thought about that. It's interesting, yeah, because what you're saying is the industry had that. Like the Rainmaker has been around forever, both as a glorified myth and also reality. But you're right. It's not a scalable. It's not a scalable model. Or the argument to make for marketing would be, what we should be doing is scale that. Right? It's great that Stephanie over here is crushing it, her numbers every quarter, but we only have one of her, so we need several. So here's Ash. Ash, we have like about 4 minutes left in John's time.
Yes.
Oh, Do you have any questions for John? I've been trying to get out of him what I could in terms of what his view is on what's next in professional services marketing. And I've asked my boring questions. So maybe if you have something under that headline that's just wild and out there, just.
So what do you think about using B2C strategies in these kinds of areas? Because let's look at the entire funnel. Most of the time, professional services rarely touch on the actual digital thing because they still think, hey, let's send a person out, let's make a call. And they just go on that part of the sales funnel and they ignore that, hey, we've got this entire digital, path, which has not been used. B2C companies, on the other hand, use it really well. So what's your take? How do we get this going?
Well, I think what's some headwinds that the professional services space are facing is just incredibly long sales cycles, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that has a lot to do with it. So if you're looking at the timeline for when maybe it's an email address is acquired in your database, right? So that's like the created at date in your CRM.
Yeah.
And that's looked at as the origin of when a contact is created. Well, we don't know beyond that, before that, a lot of the time, what activities they were doing. Were they looking at your blog? Were they interacting with your brand on social media? The few posts that you do put out there. And so there's just this big unknown on that side of the equation. And then so what happens is marketers tend to optimize for what analytics they have in front of them. So if they understand when a contact comes into their CRM and when it's closed, they're going to focus on that window and not what's outside of that. So I think that's one of the big challenges there.
All right. No, completely agree. And now the fact that we're going to move to a cookie-less area gives them less analytics and less things to track.
So to your other point about, what can professional services companies learn from B2C companies? I talked about this with Florian earlier, but really the rapid iteration of creative at scale and the extent to which companies can learn how well a certain creative asset performs and then take those learnings and apply it to the next test. So that's really going to be where a lot of companies are going to be able to find a marketing advantage in the extent to which the creative teams can work with the promotion teams and coordinate resources and share feedback. And that time from that feedback to the next iteration of creative, I think that's where a lot of professional services firms, they may find an advantage because the B2C companies, they're doing that, but the B2B and professional services companies aren't doing it as quickly.
I like that a lot because that's certainly, I mean, the quality is very important, but also the volume matters. And then like 2 LinkedIn posts in 2 weeks, not bad, but how much better could you do if you had the capacity to do like 1 a day maybe? And many firms will struggle to do that for sure.
I think we need to think about strategic value too. Like it's not just 2 posts in 2 weeks. It's the fact that are you saying the right message in 2 weeks? Not just that are you saying the same message. What I'm seeing sometimes is there's a delay, but in that delay your message might have changed slightly. Ever so slightly that, the person you're talking to suddenly thinks something different. And you've seen this when you put out thought leadership.
Yeah. Would you say that that's changed though? It's a question for both of you. I don't know if you might, because to me that the COVID thing, what that seemed to do was all the big firms suddenly seemed to have like entire sweatshops full of writers. McKinsey was just putting out stuff like daily, basically, and it was fairly good. Accenture, to their credit, actually did the same, like just shoveling, and I was like, where does that volume come from? Like we were doing like 1 major research piece in half a year, and now suddenly there's 15 up on the page after a week. What's that? Like, has that been accelerated actually? Are people now faster, or is that just a one-off thing?
I would say that I know when the coronavirus really started more than a year ago at this point, people spent significantly more time online. So there was more opportunity to consume different pieces of content. And I think I read a stat where the number of emails in any given inbox increased by like 60%. during that time over pre-COVID numbers. So the rate at which companies are creating content, other companies are seeing that and they want to match that level. So users are just being inundated with content to the point where, Ash, to your point, quality content kind of rises above the noise. So I think that's part of what we're seeing.
Look at this.
That goes back to your point about the right message and the timing, right? Early on. Yeah, I don't know. I realized it's the half hour and you wanted to hop off quarter past, right? John, did you have anything to say we didn't cover, or do you have any interesting something you are working on in the professional services marketing space?
I mentioned I'm launching a podcast, and we talked at length about that. But the other thing that I'm really interested is what's going to be the impact of all these different platform changes. So the Apple iOS 14.5 update, how is that going to impact Facebook campaigns? So I'm really, really looking at that very closely, and how do we convey what the impact of those changes are to our audience. So that's the content that I'm really focused on creating right now. And I'm really excited to share what I learned with you and with others.
Brilliant. So speaking of your projects, where can people find you and then find out more about your work? Where would you direct them to?
Well, connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can follow me on Twitter at John_Tyreman. And then you can check out my work at silverbackstrategies.com. Brilliant.
And we are going to put all of that in the show notes as well. Thanks a lot, John. That was a fun and fascinating conversation. Thanks for the insights. Ash, do you have anything else?
No, thanks for being a great guest and answering all these questions that we had. If you got more, feel free to come back.
That's it.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.